Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting, exhilarating, amazing presentation on globalization. But in this case, we're going to talk a little bit more about a globalization issue, and that is outsourcing. It's a trend, it's a action, it is something that has taken over the world, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail with it and really take a look at it from a Canadian perspective. So make sure you get out your notes, you provide your summary, follow along, and enjoy. Alright, so what do I hope that you will achieve by the end of this video? Well, I hope you understand what international business and globalization really is again. We're just going to recap that. What is outsourcing? Why companies outsource? And if we're going to get into detail of outsourcing, we need to identify some of the major terms associated with outsourcing. From a Canadian perspective, we'll take a look at the industries that outsource, some motivations and costs associated with these industries and outsourcing. So when we talk about outsourcing, we really think about two economies, and that is India and China. Now, when it comes to India, its great economic boom, the arrival of the internet and outsourcing have broken the wall between provincial India and the rest of the world. Now, this is a great quote because I think it really captures the essence of outsourcing and globalization. Right? The idea that the world is now connected. A lot of this is due to technology, and industries from all over the world are able to find their place in countries all over the world where essential skills and resources are available. But before we get into outsourcing in detail, let's quickly recap what international business is. Again, think of business on its own, right? These are transactions that occur between consumers and businesses. Well, when we take this internationally, we're considering businesses and transactions happening all over the world between private businesses and government, with sales and investments, logistics and transportation. And when they are connected between regions around the world and countries, then we are talking international business. And through these international business connections, we've seen the rise of globalization. Right? This has happened for ages, for centuries, but the modern globalization has really taken off through culture, business, and technology. We've seen connections happen all over the world, and businesses thrive as a result. And one of these connections is outsourcing. So we hear the term thrown around quite regularly, outsourcing. Well, what does it mean? Well, this is when businesses take a function of their business, of their operations, of their production, right? And they move it to another place somewhere else in the world where another business can perform that function. If you think Canada and businesses such as manufacturing businesses, we see that many of these companies are outsourcing their manufacturing components, their production, to places like China, where they have the skills and resources required to perform such a function at a much lower cost. When we think of something like service businesses and performing a function such as telemarketing, well, we see that locations around the world, such as India, provide a great benefit for businesses to perform this function. And this is really what outsourcing is. So why are businesses doing this? Well, the main reason, the main driver of outsourcing really comes down to the idea of costs. Now, we'll get into further motivations later, but if you take a look at this map, you really start to see how this provides the reasoning necessary to outsource. Right? When you look at places around the world and you look at, let's say, minimum wages, countries such as Canada, the United States, Australia have very high minimum wages, and countries such as those in Europe. But when you look around the world, you see that many countries, especially those in Southeast Asia, have wages that are far, far less than our minimum wages. And when you can access these resources very effectively and efficiently through the use of technology, then why not? Why not locate your business somewhere else in the world that can perform the same function at roughly the same quality for a far lower cost? So before we get into further detail and really look at these motivations and costs of outsourcing, let's really take a look at some of the terms associated. Now, onshoring is when a company basically outsources but keeps it within the same country, right? So outsourcing it to another province, such as call centers being set up in Prince Edward Island, which was a major trend of the 90s for many companies. Offshoring is when you outsource to another country far, far away, and we see that all the time with companies setting up operations in China and India. Nearshoring is what happens when many Canadian businesses set up operations, or parts of their operation, again, to a country that's not so far away. So the United States, for example. With NAFTA, we see a lot of this trend happening more so towards Mexico. And insourcing, and this is what happens when companies bring their operations and processes back to their original location, back to their company, and keep it in-house basically, so they can keep a closer eye on things, a closer watch, and ensure quality, right? Take a look from the Canadian perspective. When we think outsourcing, we think many Canadian companies are taking advantage of this, and this is the case. We see that roughly 2% of all industries outsource to somewhere else in the world. Of that, roughly about 5% is manufacturing, but just as much is outsourced is brought back in through inshoring. So companies have tried this and they found, it's not the best thing. When we look at this and we break it down in terms of industries, we really see that production is the main industry when it comes to outsourcing. Services is a big one, and distribution and logistics as well. But production really is the main industry of outsourcing. Call centers, more is brought into Canada than is outsourced, which is very interesting, right? And if you go through that list, you really see that quite a number of industries are inshoring rather than offshoring. So why do companies do this? Why do companies outsource to other parts of the world? Well, mainly it comes down to costs, both non-labor and labor costs. However, delivery times can be more efficient through outsourcing. The access to knowledge and skills. Many countries around the world have workforces that are more knowledgeable on performing a certain function, that have certain skills. Logistics, managing the supply chain and managing your consumers, managing the products in terms of reaching the consumer, it can be again more efficient. The ability for you to focus on your core business, and any of those minor functions of your business can be outsourced to somewhere else. Therefore, you're able to add quality to your own core business. The idea of new goods or services can be created because of outsourcing, because again, the idea of knowledge and skills and people who have these can be more innovative and therefore develop new products, new goods, new services for you. The idea of competition. We know that through globalization, competition is a major force. It always has been, and it always will be. So if competition's doing it, then you definitely want to think of it for your own business. Tax or other financial incentives. We have high taxes here in Canada. Other countries don't. And so that could lead to lower costs. And the lack of labor in home countries. And this is something that we definitely have to think of when we think of Canada. 34 million people roughly. You look at China with 1 billion and India with 1 billion. That's a lot more labor available to many companies. As we saw many companies outsourcing, we also saw many companies inshoring. Why are they doing this? Well, a lot of it has to do with the poor quality control, that they can't control their production in far-off countries. So many of their products might lose quality. So you want to bring that back in-house to ensure that quality, if that's something that is your competitive advantage. The idea of loss of strategic alignment has to do with the idea that if you have operations all over the place, then you might not really have that control in that strategy, and that focus on that strategy might be lost. Lack of governance, right? Are you going to manage all those business operations all over the world? Most likely you're not. You set up other people to do so. But if those other people have different ideas and opinions on the way of running things, well, then your governance of your company is lost. The initial setup costs of actually opening up companies and around the world to perform the functions you need can cost quite a bit. Layoffs, right? We've seen this with banks, such as the most recent one with Royal Bank, right? If they're going to outsource or offshore to another country, then they're going to lay off people here at home. This often carries with it quite the criticism from our national media and Canadian citizens, and that's something that many companies are not willing to deal with. Cultural clash. Not every culture is the same, and we'll look at this in detail. Right? And different ways of doing things and different ways of working can be quite the difficulty to overcome. And lastly is management. Who are you going to get up to set up to run your operations? Right? The idea of management is very key in running a business, and if you can't find the proper management, is it really worth it? So now it comes down to your own business and your own personal opinion. Should you outsource? Well, that really depends on what you are doing. What is your product? What is your service? What is your competitive advantage? Right? Is it going to help you in the long run? Is it going to cost you more? Right? All these costs and motivations have to be weighed. You have to evaluate the decision. It's not always the best choice. We often think it is from any company, but that's not the case. So hopefully we have a better idea now, and hopefully if you're ever in that position, you take a look at these costs and benefits and really evaluate the proper decision. So here's what I'm going to leave you with. Consider outsourcing, consider inshoring, consider offshore, consider all these things associated with it. What companies can really excel with outsourcing? What companies should reconsider outsourcing, so it may not be ideal for them? I want you to consider industries and specific companies and really critically think about this. All right, so that brings us to the end of our lecture. Hopefully you have your notes in order, and that's it. That's all. That's everything. We'll see you tomorrow.